Tea was the middle of the night when 7-year-old Myra Patel first heard it. A deep, rumbly, earth-shaking sound that made her tummy wobble like jelly. She sat up straight in her cozy bed, her dark curls sticking out in every direction, and she listened very, very carefully. Guru-umble. Whoa. Guru-umble. That is not the wind, Myra whispered to herself. She pulled her purple blanket up to her nose. Her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, toppled over beside her. The sound was coming from right below her, from under her bed. Most children would have screamed. Most children would have run to their parents' rooms so fast their slippers flew off. But Myra was not most children. Myra was the kind of girl who collected beetles in glass jars and read books about volcanoes for fun. Myra was curious, and curiosity is a very powerful thing. Glowing star Myra. Whatever is under my bed, she said bravely, holding Mr. Peanuts very tight. I am going to find out what you are. She reached over to her bedside table and grabbed her red torch, the one shaped like a rocket ship. She clicked it on. A bright beam of light shot through the darkness. Slowly, very slowly, she leaned down over the edge of her bed and pointed the torch underneath. What she saw made her eyes go as big and round as dinner plates. There, curled up in an impossibly large ball under her perfectly ordinary bed, was a dragon. A real, actual, honest-to-goodness dragon. It was enormous, its scaly green and gold body somehow squeezed under the bed frame, its spiky tail looped around twice. Tiny curls of smoke drifted from its huge nostrils. Its eyes were firmly shut. It was, without any doubt, completely and deeply asleep. And it was snoring. Tremendously. Magnificently. The kind of snoring that rattled the windows and made the pictures on the wall tilt sideways. Myra stared for a long, long moment. Then she did something extraordinary. She did not scream. She did not run. Instead, she quietly sat back up, placed Mr. Peanuts carefully on her pillow, and said to herself, well, I shall need a plan. Why morning, the dragon was still there. Myra had spent the whole night awake, scribbling notes in her special notebook by torchlight. She had written things like, green scales with gold edges, 4 legs, 2 wings, folded. Tail equals very long. Does not have horns. Smells like burnt cinnamon and old libraries. When Mama called her down for breakfast, Myra shouted, coming, and then leaned over the edge of the bed one more time. Glowing star Myra. Please don't come out while I'm at school, she whispered firmly. And please try to snore more quietly. Our neighbor Mrs. Gupta thinks we have a faulty boiler. One enormous golden eye slowly opened. It was the size of a football and glowed like a lamp. The dragon blinked at her slowly, the way cats do when they're not really paying attention, and then closed it again. Myra went to school feeling like she might burst. All through maths and English and even her favorite science lesson, she could only think about the dragon under her bed. Was it a boy dragon or a girl dragon? How had it gotten into her room? Did it need to eat something? Did it need to go to the toilet? This was a very important question and Myra wrote it down twice. That afternoon, she raced home faster than she had ever run before, took the stairs 3 at a time, and burst into her bedroom. The snoring had stopped. Myra knelt down and peeked under the bed. Both enormous golden eyes were open now, watching her with an expression that she could only describe as deeply embarrassed. Dragon the dragon. I know, said a voice like rolling thunder mixed with soft bells. I know. This is extremely awkward. Myra sat back on her heels. She had not expected the dragon to speak. She had really not expected the dragon's first words to be about awkwardness. Glowing star Myra. Can you come out from under there? She asked politely. So we can talk properly. There was a very long pause. Then an enormous, rather sheepish-looking dragon slowly emerged from beneath Myra's bed. It was even bigger than she'd imagined, and yet somehow the room didn't feel crushed at all. It was as if the room had quietly decided to make more space, because something this magical deserved it. The dragon sat in the middle of Myra's bedroom, wings pressed flat, looking at the floor like a schoolchild who had been caught eating someone else's lunch. Dragon the dragon. My name, it said quietly, is Ember, and I owe you a very big apology. Ira sat cross-legged on her bed, notebook open on her knee, pencil at the ready. Ember sat on the floor. There really was no other option, with his tail curled neatly around his paws and his golden eyes full of a sad sort of hopefulness. His story came out slowly at first, like water trickling through a crack in a rock. Then it came out all at once, in a tremendous rush. Ember was not from here. He was from a place called the Silverhorn Mountains, far away, so far away that if you walked there, you'd grow a beard before you arrived, even if you were a little girl. In those mountains, dragons lived alongside humans quite happily. They lit bonfires with their breath in winter. They helped farmers by scaring away wolves. In return, the humans left them bowls of hunted porridge and sang them songs on special nights. But something had gone wrong. Something called the forgetting had crept into the mountains like fog. One by one, the humans had stopped remembering that dragons were real. They started calling the old dragon fire pits natural hot springs. They explained away the claw marks in the cliff faces as unusual erosion. They walked right past dragons on the mountain paths without seeing them at all. Sharkanya Ember. When nobody believes in you, Ember said, his voice dropping to a rumble, you start to become transparent. Like smoke. I could feel myself fading. So Ember had done the only thing a fading dragon could do. He had followed the dream thread, a thin golden line that only dragons and very small children can see, hoping it would lead him somewhere he could rest and recover, somewhere he would be believed in again. The dream thread had led him, rather unexpectedly, under Myra's bed. Sharkanya Ember. You believed in dragons even before you saw me, Ember said, looking at her with those huge golden eyes. I could tell. People who believe in things have a special glow about them. Yours was rather bright. Like a torch. Glowing star Myra. I do have a torch, said Myra, holding up her rocket-shaped one. But I think I understand what you mean. She chewed the end of her pencil thoughtfully. Glowing star Myra. So you need people to believe in you to become solid again, she said slowly. Like you need belief the way we need food. Sharkanya Ember. Exactly like that, said Ember. Except belief is much harder to find than porridge. Myra looked at her notebook. She looked at Ember. She looked at her notebook again. An idea was forming, a big, bright, possibly slightly ridiculous idea. Glowing star Myra. I think, she said carefully, that I am going to need some help. Ire's two best friends were called Zara and Tom. Zara was brilliant at art and could draw anything from memory. Tom was brilliant at eating biscuits and also at building things. He had once built a working catapult out of pencils and a rubber band, which had not ended well for the classroom hamster. The hamster was fine. It had simply had the surprise of its life. Getting them to believe in Ember was, as Myra had suspected, not entirely straightforward. When she told Zara on the walk to school, Zara said, "That's amazing. Can I draw him?" Which was encouraging. When she told Tom, Tom said, "Cool. Does he play video games?" Which was less useful but also quite Tom. That Saturday, Myra smuggled both of them upstairs to her bedroom. Ember was awake and waiting, wearing what Myra could only describe as his trying very hard to look friendly and not terrifying expression, which involved holding his fire breath very carefully inside and trying not to show too many teeth. Zara let out a sound that was half scream and half the word beautiful, and immediately began drawing in her sketchpad. Tom walked straight up to Ember, looked him in the eye, and offered him a biscuit. Sharkanya Ember. I don't eat biscuits, Ember said gently. Boy Tom. That's all right, said Tom. More for me. They were, immediately and entirely, on Myra's side. Together, the four of them made a plan. It was a good plan. It had 3 stages, a backup plan, and a color-coded chart. That was Zara's contribution. The plan was called Operation Believe, and it went like this. Stage 1. Gather the neighborhood children in Myra's garden and introduce them to Ember, carefully, one by one, so nobody panicked. Stage 2. Take photographs and make a special book that could be given to grown-ups so they would believe too. Stage 3. Figure out how to send enough belief back to the Silverhorn Mountains so the other dragons stopped fading too. Stage 3 was, admittedly, still quite vague. Myra had written figure out the how part with a large question mark. But the best adventures, she had always found, required a certain amount of question marks to keep them interesting. There was, however, a problem. And the problem walked into the garden at exactly the wrong moment. The problem was Felix Drummond, from number 14. Felix was 9 years old and firmly, loudly, and frequently convinced that he was the most sensible person in the world. He did not believe in anything he could not put in a pickle jar and show to a teacher. face with look of triumph Felix. That, said Felix, appearing at the garden gate and staring at Ember with his arms crossed, is a very large lizard. Sharkan Ember. I beg your pardon, said Ember, with enormous dragon dignity. Face with look of triumph Felix. Someone's dressed it up with fake wings, Felix continued, stepping closer. Probably papier-mâché. Miss Morrison did something similar for the school play. Ember, who had approximately 8,000 years of dragon heritage and ancestors who had flown over burning mountains, looked at this small boy with his crossed arms and his pickle jar logic. Then, very calmly, Ember spread his enormous wings, which were so wide they blocked out the sun, and breathed out a single small flame, shaped neatly like a flower. Felix did not say anything for quite a long time. Face with look of triumph Felix, quietly. That's not papier-mâché, is it? Sharkan Ember. No, said Ember. It is not. And Felix, to his absolute credit, sat right down on the grass, uncrossed his arms, and said, Okay, tell me everything. Paration Believe grew faster than any of them had expected, the way good ideas always do when the right people catch hold of them. Zara filled an entire sketchbook with drawings of Ember, Ember stretching his wings in the garden, Ember carefully trying to fit through the garden gate, he couldn't, Ember accidentally setting a flower pot on fire with a sneeze and looking deeply mortified. The drawings were passed around school in hushed, excited whispers, though their teacher, Mr. Davies, confiscated one and spent 20 minutes staring at it before quietly placing it in his desk drawer. Tom built an obstacle course in the garden for Ember to practice flying. It involved garden canes, old hula hoops, and Myra's papa's best umbrella, which did not survive the afternoon. Tom also figured out that Ember loved oat biscuits, the plain ones, not chocolate chip, and after that the two of them got along tremendously well. Felix, who had renamed himself the official dragon scientist, was busily writing a notebook of observations so thorough and detailed that it would have made Myra proud if she weren't slightly jealous of his color-coded tabs. And slowly, wonderfully, Ember began to glow. Not just in his eyes, all over. The gold in his scales became brighter. His wings, which had been a bit thin and papery, filled out and shimmered. He grew, very slightly, just a little bit larger. And when he breathed, the flames were not grey wisps anymore but proper, beautiful, curling orange and gold fire that smelled of autumn leaves and warm spices. Sharkan Ember. That's belief, he told Myra, stretching his wings in the last of the evening sunshine. Every time someone truly sees me, I get a little more real. The hardest part, it turned out, was the grown-ups. Myra's papa had nearly fainted the first time he came into the garden and found a dragon the size of a small car eating biscuits with his daughter. Her mama had sat very still for a while, said right then in a very controlled voice, and then made Ember a cup of tea, which he drank from a bucket and said was excellent, thank you very much. Once the parents believed, the neighbors followed quickly. Mrs. Gupta from next door brought her whole extended family at once. The three brothers from across the road sat on their garden wall and watched Ember practice flying every evening, whooping and cheering when he got the turns right. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, which felt like a slightly ordinary night for an extraordinary event. The sky was very clear, studded with 1,000 silver stars. Ember stood in the middle of the street. The whole street had come outside by now, in their dressing gowns and slippers, some holding mugs of hot chocolate, and he spread his wings as wide as they would go. They were enormous. They blotted out half the stars. The wind they made as they beat gently ruffled every single person's hair. And then Ember flew. He went up and up and up, spiraling into the dark sky, his gold scales catching the moonlight so that he looked like a falling star moving backwards. He breathed a great bloom of fire, and for a moment the whole sky was lit up warm orange and all the street below gasped as one, every face turned upward, every pair of eyes wide open and shining. Oh, said Myra's papa, very quietly. Oh, they're real. And in the Silverhorn Mountains, very far away, something shifted. A faint warmth moved through the cold air. Old stone walls that had felt hollow began to feel solid again. And in a deep cave near the highest peak, a very old dragon opened one golden eye and thought, someone remembers. Woe weeks after the night of the great flight, Ember told Myra it was nearly time for him to go back. He said it on a Wednesday afternoon, very gently, while they were sitting in the garden. Myra was doing her homework and Ember was watching a ladybird walk across his enormous paw with tremendous interest and concentration. Myra put down her pencil. She had known this was coming. She had known it from the moment Ember had told her his story. That didn't make the hollow feeling in her chest any smaller. Glowing Star Myra. Because the others need you, she said. It was not a question. Sharkanya Ember. Because the others need what I'm carrying back, Ember said quietly. All that belief. All those people who looked up and remembered. I'm like a jar full of fireflies now. And the mountains are very dark. Myra thought about the dragons fading like smoke in mountain paths nobody walked anymore. She thought about Felix's notebook and Zara's drawings and Tom's biscuit crumbs and her papa saying, "Oh, they're real," in that small, wondering voice. She thought about all the light that one Tuesday night had made. Glowing Star Myra. Will I see you again? She asked. Ember was quiet for a moment. The ladybird flew away from his paw in a small orange arc. He watched it go. Sharkanya Ember. The dream thread brought me to someone who believed, he said at last. I think, if you keep believing, it will always know where to find you. The whole street came to say goodbye. Mrs. Gupta brought a tin of biscuits for Ember. Tom gave him a small drawing he'd done himself. It was not as good as Zara's, but it was extremely enthusiastic. Felix gave him the official Dragon Scientist notebook, every page filled, with a dedication on the front that read, "For Ember, who proved that putting things in pickle jars is not always the point." Zara gave him the full sketchbook. Ember held it very carefully in his great clawed paw and looked at the drawings for a long, long time. Sharkanya Ember. In the mountains, he said, his voice rough and warm, the dragons will know they were seen. That they were remembered. That is the most powerful magic there is. Myra walked with him to the edge of the park at the end of her road, which was wide enough for him to take off from. Her mama and papa walked behind her, and behind them came the whole street in a long, quiet, remarkable procession. Neighbors who had never properly spoken to each other, all walking together in the early morning light to say goodbye to a dragon. At the park gate, Ember lowered his great head until it was level with Myra's face. His golden eyes were warm and steady as lanterns. Sharkanya Ember. You were never afraid, he said softly. Even in the dark, under your bed, with your rocket torch. You leaned in. Glowing Star Myra. I was a little bit afraid, Myra admitted. But curiosity was louder. Ember made a sound that was somewhere between a rumble and a laugh, and it smelled beautifully of burnt cinnamon. Then he stood straight, unfurled his wings, vast and golden in the morning sun, and with 3 great beats that shook the leaves from all the trees and set every bird in the park flying up in a startled, wheeling cloud, he rose. Up. And up. And up. The street watched in silence, every single face turned toward the sky. A dragon, golden and real, flying home with a jar full of fireflies and a sketchbook and a tin of biscuits and all that bright, gathered belief, the most powerful magic in the world. Myra watched until she couldn't see him anymore. Until he was just a bright speck between the clouds. Until even that was gone. She stood there a moment longer anyway. Then she reached into her pocket. She pulled out her rocket torch and clicked it on, even though it was morning and the light was golden and everywhere. She pointed it at the sky, just for a second, and then she turned and walked home. She had a notebook to fill, after all. And somewhere, in the Silverhorn Mountains, there were dragons waiting to be believed in again. That was more than enough reason to keep going.